We're going to be fighting through traffic here. I'd like to invite Dr. William Serrata, the president of El Paso Community College, to come up and give some welcoming remarks.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year to each and every one of you. Hope that 2023 proves to be an outstanding year for El Paso, for the state of Texas, as well as the nation. I want to thank you for attending this most important event as we prepare for the 88th legislative session, which begins a week from today, if I'm not mistaken, folks. That's right. State Senator César Blanco, State Representative Joe Moody, Dr. Mary González, Representative Lina Ortega, and Representative Claudia Ordaz. Want to thank you all as our delegation. Each of you represents our community fiercely in Austin, and each of you have played an instrumental role and sat on key committees in past sessions. So I'm sure that each of you will continue to serve on prominent committees and in leadership roles. And we will certainly need that as you consider the Texas Community College Finance Commission recommendations that were released in November. So we really look forward to you taking those into consideration, yes. Finally, I'd like to thank Mr. Bob Moore for his leadership and focus on all levels of education in the greater El Paso community, which is held throughout his career. Our community is well served and better informed given Mr. Moore's leadership, tenacity, and reporting. And so I will keep this brief. I want to get to the conversation, but welcome and thank you so much for being here, each of you.
Thank you, Dr. Serrata, and it's a real honor to kick off 2023 here with our partners at El Paso Community College. The college is such a tremendously important asset for this community and has been a key to this community's growth for the last 50 plus years and is going to be increasingly important, I think, as we go forward. So it's an honor to be at an El Paso Community College facility to kick off what we at El Paso Matters hope are a number of events that we'll have throughout the year to address some of the significant issues that are facing El Paso. I want to thank the legislative delegation for being with us tonight, and it's an honor to moderate this, especially with the session coming up just a week away. I know time is tight for all of you now coming out of the holidays and getting prepared for the session, so thank you so much for giving your time today. We're joined by 5 members of our legislative delegation. There's one member who could not be with us tonight, Representative Eddie Morales, who is representing parts of El Paso for the first time in this legislative session. He and his wife had a long scheduled vacation around the same time, so he's not able to make it, but he will be an important part of the El Paso delegation as we move forward. With us tonight, and I'll start from my right at the end, State Senator César Blanco, one of 31 members of the Texas Senate. Senator Blanco, it's great to have you with us today. And next to him is State Representative Joe Moody. Representative Moody has been a key part of House leadership in the past couple of sessions. We'll see what happens in this session. Representative Mary González has been a key leader on a number of issues, particularly on appropriations and education for a number of sessions. Representative Lina Ortega, as a point of personal privilege, she is my representative. I live in her district. Representative Ortega has been a key member on a number of issues, probably most importantly given where we are, a real leader on higher education issues in the legislature. And finally, we have Representative Claudia Ordaz, who's heading into her second legislative session, also a former longtime member of City Council. I'm sure she enjoys not being on City Council today, in particular, for some reason. But it's very good to have Representative Ordaz with us here today, too. And I'd like to start the conversation just by asking each member to summarize what for them are the priorities that they see as this legislative session begins in a week and then sprints through to May. This will go real fast as legislative sessions often do. And I'm going to start with Senator Blanco. What are your key priorities in this legislative session?
Well, thanks, Bob. It's great to be here, and thank you to El Paso Community College for convening this event. You know, I think the most important thing from my perspective right now, Bob, is kitchen table issues. You know, folks are still feeling the pinch from inflation. Property taxes are high. You know, the cost of food, it's expensive. There's a lot of food insecurity. So I think for us, what's most important is making sure that we're helping families. And you can help families by doing a variety of things, and I think these are a couple of things that we're going to be focusing on, about providing property tax relief. And from my perspective, I think the best way to provide property tax relief is making investments in public education. If we were to fund at least 50% of what it costs to fund our public school systems, we would be providing tax relief for property owners. And I think that's big. It's been a huge issue in the state of Texas. So that's something the Lieutenant Governor has said that he wants to focus on, and I think it's an important thing to focus on. The other part of it is food insecurity. At least 100,000 people in El Paso are impacted by food insecurity. A lot of folks are on receive SNAP benefits. One of the things I'm looking at is changing how we look at the vehicle asset test, meaning if you own a vehicle that is worth about $15,000 plus a second vehicle for $4,000, or anything higher than that, you're not going to meet the requirements. So a lot of people, number one, they need a car to go to work, right? And those values are outdated. So I've got a bill that's going to be focusing on that. We've got to look at college tuition. We've got to look at CTE. These are the things that I think are going to help our economy, are going to help our workforce. It's very expensive to go to college.
So CTE, just to clarify, career and technology
Career technology, absolutely. And what we see from places like El Paso Community College have done a phenomenal job. We need to get people into these skills, get them out with very little debt, and earning a good income. So from my perspective, I think kitchen table issues from a statewide perspective, and when I say CTE, we're also focusing on nurses. There's a huge nursing shortage. There's a teacher shortage. So we're going to focus on a lot of these issues, but I think those are the issues that impact people's wallet, and I think are going to make a difference if we do it the right way this session.
Representative Moody, we'll go to you next. I think it's worth noting that there are 151 members of the State House of Representatives. 4 of them are represented on this stage. So El Paso has an important voice in what happens in the House of Representatives, but you're not one of 31 like the senator. So what are your priorities?
There we go. This is going to be an incredibly challenging session on a lot of levels. There's a lot of things we can touch on here. Senator touched on some major issues, and I don't want to step on every single thing we could touch on, but I try to put things in 2 buckets. When we're out here in El Paso, and you mentioned the size of our delegation, we've been punching above our weight for the last several sessions. The reason why we have a dental school, the reason why we have a standalone medical campus here, the reason why we have advances at UTEP and at community college, even though we've asked them to do a lot with very little, and we need to do more for them, is because this group works as a cohesive unit, and we see any victory for any one of us as a victory for all of us. So that's important. And so that's when I talk about, I put 2 things that kind of put buckets out there. There are El Paso issues, right? There are El Paso issues that I don't care where the world of politics sits. Those are important to us, and we need to push them forward. There are the things that are antithetical to who we are. Vilifying immigrants, using this situation going on at the border right now as some way to create a wedge between people. We need to push back against that type of rhetoric. We've seen in a very real way the danger that that creates, the violence that that creates. And it's not to say this isn't a complicated issue that deserves time and attention and effort. It does, but we have to take the vitriol out, and we need to put the humanity in. And ultimately, the state of Texas isn't going to be the problem solver of the immigration issue at our border, but we can have an important voice in the way that we handle it. So I'd put something like, what are we doing to push back against? So I put a bucket of issues there. And then the third would be, what are the big broad-based issues that we want to help move along, whether that's transportation infrastructure, water infrastructure, investing in our human capital through our education systems, whatever they may be, and protecting our traditional public education system. So those are the three buckets I like to put things in. If I'm focusing on the local level, I know that all of us feel very strongly about the reimagining of Weiler Aerial Tramway. That's an important project that's been it's been at the center of our focus since it went offline, and it's going to take a little bit more muscle to get across the finish line. We got the dental school funded, but there's not a proper facility for the dental school. And we went through the special sessions last time, 3 of them, that none of them were special, by the way. We had the opportunity to invest in our higher education infrastructure, but we did so in a way that didn't fund projects properly. So when Texas Tech or UTEP ask for something, they go, oh, here's 50%. And you go, oh, that's great, I'll build half a building. Well, now UTEP as an institution can work with that, and Texas Tech can try to figure out how to move that within their own budget, but that's not the way we should do those things. So we need a true facility for the dental school at the Texas Tech campus, and if that opportunity presents itself, it needs to be one of our major local priorities. I'll very quickly touch on the fact that between the last time we had a conversation like this and now, I've spent a significant amount of time in Uvalde. It's not where I planned on spending time. It's not people that I ever thought I'd meet. It's not a town I had ever been to. But it is etched into my mind and my heart forever. And my hope is that along with school security, along with police accountability, along with mental health reforms, that we bring true, real gun safety measures to the table so that we can stop the violence before it visits another community. I just want to touch on that because it will always play an important role in what this delegation does because of what came to our community. But having lived that with another community, it is impressed on me in a different way, and it is an obligation that we all have. And if we're not doing all those things at once, we are failing not just Uvalde, we're failing our entire state.
Representative González, your priorities for the session?
Thank you, Bob, and I'm really honored to be here with my colleagues and with you, and here in EPCC. Thank you, Dr. Serrata, who is my constituent, so I will say that. It's a unique position I'm in, being Vice Chair of Appropriations. It's been decades since someone from El Paso has represented us in that capacity. And so for me, we're in a unique position having $27 billion in excess revenue, our Economic Stabilization Fund being where it's at, just thinking about how we utilize our budget to be the moral document that we say it is. And so a long time ago, seems like it was just around the corner, but we did HB3, which was transformational for public education. And then we always said we're going to come back and do higher education. And then COVID happened and things changed. But now we have a really unique opportunity to do what we've always said we need to do in higher ed, which is research funding, which is accessibility and financial funding for people to have access to colleges and community college finance commission outcomes. So I'm looking forward for us having a conversation about truly transforming how we think about higher education funding, whether it's facilities, whether it's access through financial aid, whether it's community colleges and how we actually pay them. I'm looking forward to thinking through how we use the budget as a moral document to fund things that we haven't funded. We are so behind in CPS funding, DFPS, just so many areas where we need to be doing more work. Also, you know that my heart is in public education, so accountability and assessment, you could take a poll of Texans, Republican and Democrat, and they would say one thing that they all agree on, accountability and assessment, that it needs to be changed. No parent, no kid likes a STAR test. It's not working. We know it's not working. The outcomes aren't working. The way we measure our schools isn't working. So why haven't we changed it? So looking at accountability assessment is really critical. So for me, those are probably the areas in which I'm pretty much going to stay in my lanes, budget and education. But those are key issues this upcoming session.
And those are two pretty big lanes. I might point out.
I like, when I say lanes, I mean highways, which will transition beautifully to Representative Ortega.
My third grader just agreed with you, by the way. about the STAR.
You hate the STAR test? Yeah? He's like, yeah.
Representative Ortega, your priorities for the session?
Sorry, a little slow. There, it works. I've got to say that I don't know what to expect this upcoming session. I think last session was a huge, huge disappointment for me, because I think that we all as a delegation worked really hard to try to make changes that were going to be beneficial not only for this community but across the state. And we were met with a session that was very focused on things that not everybody here was interested in dealing with. So it was a session that I was happy that it's over with, that we're gone. And I'm hoping that this session is going to be so much better for Texas and specifically for El Paso. On the House side, as Bob just explained, we have 150 members. We actually have 27 new representatives. There was just a huge turnover. And out of the 27 new representatives, seven of them are Democrats, the rest are Republican. So we're going to be dealing with members that we don't, a lot of new members that we do not know. And I guess one of the things that El Paso has been so effective is that we really reach out. When we are on the House floor, you see everybody, and I'm sorry, I'm going to start coughing. We see everybody going out there and talking to other members, and we talk to them about our bills and why those bills are important not only to our community but to the rest of the state. So it's hard to know how it's going to be this session. I'm looking forward that it's going to be an effective session across the state, and that we're looking at the governor telling us that reducing property taxes are a big item on his list. We're usually told at the beginning of the session what his priorities are when we meet jointly with the Senate. So I'm looking forward to that and to listening to that. I think that everybody recognizes that having a strong workforce across the state is also going to be priority. I know that the plan, as Representative González brought up with regard to higher education, I know that we need to strengthen our higher education. We need to make sure that there's more funding available. We know that outcome-based education is key. There is a report, as Dr. Serrata mentioned a little earlier, in November that was out there that's going to help hopefully have more people attend community college, make it cheaper for them to attend. I personally believe that higher ed, for those that show that they are wanting to pursue a higher education and can do so, ought to be free. This is something that the state should be providing, but we're not quite there. I'm also I'm huge on higher education. I believe strongly in doing more when it comes to transportation. There's several bills that I have filed dealing with transportation. I can get into specifics later on, but I also think that another thing that is, to me, high priority, we dealt with it last session, but not sufficiently, was public health. It's in El Paso, We have a limited number of medical health professionals. We need more. We need to expand the pool of healthcare providers. And it's not good in the state of Texas as a whole, but you can just imagine if it's something that's not good in the state of Texas where we are in El Paso. There's also, my hope is that we're able to do a lot more when it comes to border issues. So I'm going to be focusing on some of the bills that I've filed dealing with border things that I believe will help strengthen our community. So it's going to be a new session. I'm staying very positive. I will be working hard for this community, and I think I have wonderful delegation members to be working with and getting things across for this community.
Representative Ordaz, your priorities? Hopefully, you'll all get your own microphones, but we'll be flexible here.
Thank you, Bob, and also EPCC for having us here today. It's really an honor to sit here on the stage with this group of people. You know, coming into this is my second session, but I didn't realize the impact this delegation truly has in the Texas House. We are small, but like Representative Moody said, or maybe Dr. González or the senator, small but mighty, and it is true. I mean, we're competing with massive delegations out in Houston and in Dallas, and so those are large blocks, large numbers. So to have these folks advocating and fighting for El Paso, they truly are really working for their constituents and working for the community, not only working, but delivering for our community. And so this coming session is I'm also very optimistic about this upcoming session. I've heard that I shouldn't be as optimistic, but I am optimistic about the work that we can do. And it's really focusing, for me at least, focusing on still what happened last legislative session, some of the bills that came out in relation to women's health care. We know that, you know, Las Cruces, for example, is a safe haven for women that are seeking health care access that we no longer have here in the state of Texas after Roe versus Wade. And so for me, I filed HB 916. I was wishing it was 915, but it's 916. And there's only 3 bills dealing with access to contraceptives for women. And so this would allow patients up to 12 months. And so I'm hopeful about that legislation. I'm working hard on both sides of the aisle to ensure that is successful and signed into law. Hopefully, God willing, and lots of candles that will be lit and a lot of hard work, but hopefully that will pass. We know women's health care has been an issue that after last legislative session, I mean, I'm hearing it from constituents. I'm hearing it from constituents across the state that are very concerned about the attacks on women's health. So that's one issue it's a new issue that I'll be dealing with. Of course, economic development is a very near and dear. We're going to be talking about Chapter 313. I'm hearing hopefully this session. We don't know if the support's there in the Senate as much as is in the House. But we know for El Pasoans, ensuring that we have job growth opportunities, economic development opportunities. When we think about the border, it's unfortunate, a lot of the rhetoric that is spoken about the border. You know, a lot of fear mongering and so on and so forth, but the potential that is here in our communities, I mean, hardworking individuals, hardworking families. So ensuring that we're going to bring good paying jobs to our region is going to be the utmost priority for me, and ensuring that when we're talking about the border, all of the positive assets about the border. There's so much more to it than just border security. Last legislative session, Senator Blanco and I, what was it, like a 22-page bill? It was like a huge bill. We secured close to $500 million for small businesses and COVID relief that are still struggling with COVID. So we know that we're still reeling from the pandemic. Those are going to be real kitchen table issues, like the senator had mentioned, that we're going to be dealing with. And what's really exciting is each of us really kind of tackle individual issues, and we work hard on those issues to deliver for our community. So I am hopeful about next legislative session.
We'll come back in May and we'll assess that optimism, right?
I'm praying praying it's May. I'm praying to all the legislative gods, we're back in May.
I may have been overly optimistic.
Well,
with May.
just bring Lina back, because she's your representative, and she can answer to you directly, Bob. I think that's important. Accountability.
I'll take you up on that. The first question I want to throw out ties to something that Representative Moody brought up, and I think it's top of mind for everybody in El Paso right now. El Paso is in the midst of an unprecedented humanitarian crisis due to migration. I want to start with the acknowledgement that this is, above all, a federal issue that has not been handled at the federal level and has basically been forced down on border communities like El Paso. But I want to talk to you about the state's role in addressing this. And Senator Blanco, I hope when you come around to talk about it, please talk about what you were doing leading up to the disaster declaration and the role that you and the delegation played behind the scenes. But the basic question I want to frame is, what is the state doing to address the crisis, and what should it be doing? And Representative Moody, I'd like to start with you on this one, since you brought it up in your remarks too. What is the state's role right now, and what should be its role?
Well, I mean, there are resources that the state can deploy out into areas like ours. And the way they utilize those resources is really kind of where the question begins. What are we using those resources for? Our nonprofits, our NGOs are overwhelmed. Our city of El Paso is overwhelmed in terms of processing folks. It's not that we haven't dealt with this before. This is a process that we know very well in our community, and then it ebbs and flows. We're just in a very high peak period. So where the state can come in is to have our support, essentially take our structure and help lift it up so that we're able to move people through that process. We're able to do health checks. We're able to make sure that we're not dumping people in the middle of the road, right? And to treating people like human beings. And so that's where the state can come into. What the state should not be involved in is deploying indiscriminately to areas and shutting down. We've seen a number of times where we've shut down safe legal trade, and we've stifled economic growth in our community and across the border region. I mean, that's not a proper utilization of state resources at the border. That compounds the problem, doesn't solve anything. And so there are ways that the state can feed resources into our community to be supportive of our infrastructure, that isn't disruptive of it, and doesn't create a larger log jam. I think that's really what we need to get to. And ultimately, which I think is kind of the sad state of political affairs, is the idea that a community like ours can be treated like a political football. We need to not let that occur. Now, folks that are deployed and told to do things, I mean, maybe they don't have, maybe they don't have a wide berth in how they handle that situation. But we need to demand that accountability because for too long, people have put a target on our back, and we know what it feels like when someone pulls the trigger.
Representative González, in part, this is an appropriations issue, right? And the money that is being spent on El Paso and in the Valley prior was not dollars that the legislature appropriated. It was dollars the governor redirected. What's the appropriate role of the appropriations process in this session? And I know there's all kinds of politics that get wrapped up in here, but what's the role the legislature has to play in this? Because this has been the governor right now, and I don't think anybody in the majority in the legislature has a problem with that, to be honest, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, lots to unpack there, gosh, Bob. Let's talk about that for the whole 2 hours. So I will start just to give on background. The legislature appropriated $2 billion to border issues, border security. We have now spent over $8 billion, so $6 billion moved by the governor through an executive order, which there's lots of questions on constitutionality that we should really ask ourselves as Texans, because these are precedents that are going to be very dangerous for us in the future. But you have to look at, and I've been chairing the Operation Lone Star Oversight Committee for the last 2 years, where we have been asking the questions, What do you spend $8 billion on? And is it being effective? Or is it just part of, and build on Representative Moody's comments, part of a political agenda? I think all of us recognize that there is a very real humanitarian crisis happening in El Paso, and has happened in other parts of the border at different times in the last year and a half. But the money that we've been using hasn't really supported and or helped with the humanitarian crisis. All it's really done is paid for things that are, I would say, problematic. Increasing the National Guard, but not paying the National Guard, paying for a whole new criminal justice system. And I think one of the concerns that I've been raising in the last year and a half is that we created a law that now says that if you trespass, you're an undocumented immigrant and you trespass, it's now a felony. And now we put you in jail for an undetermined amount of time. We don't tell you when you're going to seek a judge. We don't tell you anything. And there have been people in our jails literally without due process. We have laws. We have a constitution. We have rights. And we have all those things that have completely been ignored. So in this moment in time, we have lots of red flags that we've seen. And that's why there is a concern. And when you say, oh, the majority party, I do think there are members even of the majority party who have questions about non-appropriators making appropriations. There is very real language in the Constitution that says the legislature shall appropriate funds, not the governor. I do think next legislative session we will see an increase. Just on background, we have spent $800 million in the last 10 years on border security. Now we're going to see we saw $2 billion last session. I think you'll see upwards of $6 billion, probably more, in border security funding. But if you think about the priorities of our state, we have kids who don't have homes. We have kids who are in our CPS system who are sleeping in offices. We have kids who are in our other parts of our system who we are not staffing at capacity, so they're going to the restroom in their rooms. Like, there are priorities in the state that we have to fund, and we're spending a lot of that money in ways that aren't actually being effective. Now, if we were spending $6 billion on border security that was being effective, that would be a different conversation. We're spending $8 billion and it's not being effective. It's not handling the crisis. It's not treating people like human beings. It is harming our economic stability in Texas. Like, there's a very real conversation about what are we spending the money for, what is our return on investment, and is it actually helping and or hurting our state? And that's what's happening.
Representative Ortega, a lot of the humanitarian crisis is playing out in your district right now. You have an office not too far from where a lot of this is taking place. I'm curious as to what your view on what the state's role is and should be on responding to this.
Unfortunately, as was pointed out, the state or the governor has looked at it, that it is his role to go out there and enforce immigration laws. I mean, we've been dealing with this since my first session after I was sworn in, and we were dealing with SB 4 and being governor believing that state law enforcement ought to have the right to be able to stop and question somebody as to what their status was in Texas. That the state should not be dealing with immigration. I think it's been a waste of money when we're talking about billions of dollars and we're talking about Operation Lone Star. And talking about what Dr. González said earlier, yes, we have been involved in various meetings, various sessions in discussing what actually has happened because of Operation Lone Star. And all of the feedback that we have been receiving is it's been a failure. And instead, people have been getting hurt by everything that has been taking place. The only problem is we as Democrats have no way of stopping the type of power and authority that our governor has. I know that every one of us here voted against that specific funding that was being allocated to the governor. One thing that we learned during these meetings was that there's never really been any kind of, any kind of accounting for the way that money has been spent. And I've been asked, like, do you know ahead of time what the governor is going to do? The fact that he sent Texas National Guard over here to the border carrying weapons, and I've gone out there and seen what he's been doing. No, we're not told ahead of time that he's going to do that. The city was concerned about declaring an emergency because they were afraid of how the governor was going to react, and unfortunately, the worst did come to happen. And the fact that he's spending money bringing these trailers and trying to create barriers on the border when it's not effective. These poor people, these migrants are getting into El Paso in a different location. Instead, what you hear about is people getting hurt. It was so depressing to hear about a 24-year-old woman falling off, getting injured from coming across on climbing the wall and coming to El Paso. She ended up at UMC with several fractures. And that's not the kind of thing that we need to be hearing and having to be dealing with in El Paso. I do thank the state for bringing in people, staff, to help us, because it has been a huge humanitarian crisis. And it's good that they're willing to come out here and help us, but they should be doing more. They should be providing shelters. They should not be attacking NGOs, because obviously it's the NGOs that are helping getting us by with what's occurring in El Paso. And no, it's not good representing that area and feeling like you're helpless. All we can do is make the governor aware that we do not appreciate that that's taking place, but that hasn't stopped him, and we don't know what else can be done other than community as a whole supporting us and telling us to assist us in monetary rather than in ways that are offending people in this community.
And Representative Ordaz, in your district, the crisis plays out somewhat differently in some ways. It's in your area where you have people, because they're subject to Title 42, aren't surrendering to the Border Patrol. They're going around, finding holes in the wall, going over the wall, and in some cases, running across 375, creating problems, going into neighborhoods and things like that. So I'm wondering, what are you hearing from your constituents about what's happening with that, and particularly with the state's response? We are seeing more DPS out in that area, obviously. So how do you assess their response to the particular needs of your district now? How is the state helping, and what should it be doing to help?
Right, and you know, what's interesting is this has been happening since 2018 when I was actually on city council, and I do remember the frustration I felt as a not only as a council member, a local government representative, and also a local taxpayer. You know, that a lot of these funds, I mean, we were hearing it from constituents. I'm still hearing from those same constituents today about those concerns. Not so much about, they are concerned, worried, sad, anxious about the livelihood of these migrants. It's a humanitarian crisis at the end of the day, but they're also worried, of course, about tax dollars going to this issue, what is being done on a local level, state level, federal level. And I commend the city of El Paso for all of the work that they've been doing, and our local NGOs. And it has been a very heated political issue, unfortunately. And it has been really a disservice to this community. The issue that I have is, you know, if the state is going to provide support, And I believe Representative González had mentioned this earlier, ensuring that there's proper accountability, because there hasn't been. Previously, when there was an emergency declaration, the state had offered the Texas Guard to help with processing migrants, but they were only here for a couple of days. And so but there wasn't there's not a whole lot of accountability to these measures. And these are real dollars, and these are big dollars. And so we have to ensure that, I would like our role as a legislature to ensure that it's not just one person dictating where these funds are going to go or how they're going to be spent, but ensuring that the legislature has proper oversight. That's why we have the legislature. And so that's just my concern, is ensuring that tax dollars are used appropriately, and ensuring that we're doing our best to treat people like El Pasoans do. We welcome people with open arms. That's what we're known for. And so I'm thankful to El Pasoans in general, across the board, for really stepping up. And it's just sickening, really, that this has really been a political issue, a political football that our community's been through lately.
And Senator Blanco, as I indicated earlier, you were a key conduit to the governor in the weeks leading up to the emergency declaration and through the declaration and up to the present day. So talk about what you asked of the governor's office, what has been delivered so far, and what you hope still might be delivered.
Sure. We're in this situation because the federal government has failed. Bottom line. They are not doing their job. Two things come out of that. If the state is going to do border security, we shouldn't be doing it the way we're doing it, with boots on the ground, with concertina wire, with DPS on the border, with these semi-trailers that you see people walking around and just entering. And I've written op-eds about, if we're going to do border security, we could do it cheaper and smarter with technology, with sensors, with ITS systems that we've secured $30 million for our ports of entries. Because most of the folks that are coming across, and most of the drugs that are coming across are through trucks. They're through our ports of entry. So we can solve that through technology. In the outer parts, we can do it with drones, we can do it with sensors, we can do it with infrared, we can do it with cameras. There's a variety of things that we can use if the federal government can't do its job. And we could do it cheaper. We wouldn't be spending billions and billions of dollars. We could be doing it smarter, number one. Number two, what we should be doing is treating this as a humanitarian crisis, as everyone has said. And how do you do that? In the absence of FEMA, because this is a disaster. Our city has said it. The county has not. The city has said this is a disaster. And I understand the politics of it, right? The city and the county have to deal with the politics that come with a democratic city declaring a disaster. It puts the president in a bad spot. It gives the governor an opportunity to say that you see the borders open, et cetera. It's all politics. But in a disaster, when you have human beings, women and children, sleeping in 20-degree weather outside, that is not El Paso, that is not America. And the state, through the Texas Department of Emergency Management, can implement an operation just as a tornado or a winter storm or an earthquake or a hurricane, and provide humanitarian assistance. And we've requested that. Every single STAR request that the city and the county has requested, we have requested and supported. And the only thing that they've requested is boots on the ground to help with sheltering, boots on the ground to help with medical support, boots on the ground to help feed people, boots on the ground to help our food bank get food to our communities. Law enforcement, there are so many reports of people in the areas from Ascarate all the way down through the Mission Valley, where people are in their yards, people being arrested in backyards. These are elderly people, where these poor individuals that are coming from these countries that have failed them are trying to get across this country, but it scares them. And there's been requests from our community to get the DPF troopers off the border and onto Border Highway, where tragically people have died crossing border highway or into the neighborhoods just to have a physical presence so the community can feel safe. And most of these folks that are coming across, they just want a better life. Most of us in this room come from an immigrant background. They're just looking for the American dream. But the state could be doing a better job in the absence, once again, in the failure of the federal government. And the city and the county are doing everything that they can. I have to put in a plug for our Congresswoman, because our Congresswoman is doing everything she can to get federal dollars, and she has, to the city and to the county to deal with the response. But it's a disaster, the city's declared it, and we can't rely on the local taxpayer to foot the bill for a job that the federal government should be doing.
Is the state helping at all with taxpayer relief on this issue, or is it all coming from the feds?
They can. You can relieve El Paso Police Department and provide state troopers to be in neighborhoods. You can provide National Guard troops to help our volunteer force at the food bank. You can ensure that all of our healthcare professionals that are providing healthcare services that are on the dime of the city and the county could be utilized or augmented by state guardsmen. You know, there's a lot that the state can do to relieve that financial and logistical pressure from our local communities.
But just to be clear, at this point, they're not.
Not in the way that we're requesting. And I hope that that changes.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because I checked into it. What can the state do? And what I was basically told was it could only provide staffing and transportation. And I'm not sure that the staffing that they have been providing is adequate. And they're going to be seeking actually reimbursement through the feds in whatever they've been doing. And transportation, I think they've been lacking, because that's one of the problems that we've been having, is that these migrants need to go to their destination, and there's not enough ways for them to actually get there as quickly as they would like to. And that's why we have so many people sleeping out there in front of Sacred Heart Church. So the state, in my opinion, could be doing a lot more by providing more ways of transportation to help them, and we're not quite there. Instead, they're using other means that they believe in, trying to block them from coming into our community.
And I'll just add, and I agree with Lina, like Representative Ortega, we know what we need. We know we need to help house, feed, clothe, and transport. And instead of actually doing those things that need to be done, we have spent resources here. And I don't say we. The governor has spent resources here. The governor has sent the National Guard here. Are they doing any of the things that we actually need? And I want to applaud the county and the city council members who have been against declaring it a disaster. And not because they don't think it's a disaster, but because we know, and because we know that the governor would use our community as a political football, and we don't want to be a political football. We know that rhetoric has caused the most traumatic experience in our community. So why would we say, yes, we are a disaster, come use our community as a political football and talk about our immigrant community in negative ways and cause, I would say, more harm than good. So I really want to applaud the county, and I really want to applaud the city council members who understand we are in a crisis, but not wanting to give the governor the ability to manipulate, use, and put our people in harm. And so this is why I'm so frustrated. We know what needs to happen. It's not happening. What is happening is just for headlines or for news, and just to continue on this pathway of dehumanizing the crisis that we are in.
You just said something, and I want to wrap up this conversation with just kind of polling the delegation here. Your belief is that right now the state is doing more harm than good in its response efforts in El Paso?
I think not answering the calls of what's needed and then literally doing the opposite of what's needed is more harm than good.
Anybody disagree with that?
In public?
There are things that the state, from my perspective, the busing, which is controversial. I do think there are migrants who don't want to stay in El Paso. They do want transportation to their loved one, either in Chicago or New York and other places. I think so long as it's done in a humanitarian way, we're not dumping people at Martha's Vineyard. And I wanted to make sure that none of those buses, and we've confirmed this, none of the buses to this point from El Paso are being redirected to different cities. The NGOs are responsible for coordinating from this location to the receiving location. So when they go to a different city, there's an NGO waiting for them to help them provide services. There's a consent form that they're supposed to sign knowing exactly where they're going. There's food, there's water, there's blankets on these buses. There's a security guard on the bus as well. We were very clear that if you're going to bus, it's not going to be a political stunt. It's going to be humanitarian resources. Now, the buses that have been departing El Paso from the state side are mostly going to New York. Those are the ones that, New York and Chicago. There's also Philadelphia and there's also Washington, D.C.
What the governor refers to as sanctuary cities.
Correct. There's a political element here. Our request is to get those buses to hub cities, to Dallas, to Phoenix, to Denver, to other places, because you can get a cheaper airline ticket in those communities. Some of these folks that come do have the ability to purchase an airline ticket. You just can't purchase it from El Paso because it's double or triple the cost, right? So we've requested it. To this point, that hasn't occurred. They want to continue to do the busing to those cities. However, to this point, and I hope it remains that way, that it's done in a humanitarian way, and that those that are wanting to go to those cities are able to go to those cities.
Okay, we could talk about this all night, but there's some other issues that we want to get to. So let's talk about public education. And Representative González, I want to start with you on this one. Many Republican leaders are pushing for a plan to allow state education dollars to be directed to private schools, the form of vouchers or whatever the term is they're using these days. This is a plan that has been discussed for many years in the legislature, but never got very far, in part because of widespread Republican opposition to the idea, largely in rural areas. But the idea does seem to be gaining momentum now. So I'd like to ask each of you how you plan to respond to this legislation and what you think the likelihood of it passing is. And Representative González, I'd like to start with you.
Thanks, Bob. I was really fortunate to be appointed to the Special Ed Finance Commission by the Speaker of the House, and all the interim I've been working. So we knew in HB3 we did transformative public education funding. One thing that we did not do, and there was some intentionality around it, was we did not address special education funding. So we did spend the interim in a commission looking at how we do special education funding. And an issue that arose was vouchers specifically for special education. And what we learned just in the commission is, and I've always known, because as someone who deeply cares about public education, how vouchers take away funds from our local schools, but the research demonstrates just how vouchers are really dangerous, specifically for our most vulnerable populations, so specifically special education. So I am completely against vouchers, and I actually don't think it will go very far. If you look at to kind of take your words, there is more support. I just think there's more media attention, but there hasn't, if we took a vote last session in the House in the budget amendment, and there wasn't support for it to pass then. There was, I think, only 27 members who voted for a voucher amendment, and the rest voted against. I still think those numbers are really strong. You have Democrats, you have rural Republicans, you have an understanding of not even just rural Republicans who understand that vouchers would be problematic to the public education system as a whole. So while I know it might pass in the Senate, I still feel very optimistic and maybe I'm just going to manifest it, that vouchers will still struggle in the House.
Representative Ortega, I think in your opening remarks, you mentioned that there are something like 14 new Republicans in the House and 7 new Democrats. And so that's kind of a bit of an unknown in here too. But what's your assessment of the chances of a voucher program passing? And I mean, I know how you feel about it already, but how would you plan to address it in the legislature?
Well, I don't think, again, it's because you're looking at where the Democrats team up is with the rural representatives in order to defeat it. And I don't think that I don't believe that there's going to be that much of a change when it comes to representatives from rural communities, because their education system is based on public schools, and they're not going to be supporting giving monies to private schools when there's still not enough money for public education. So I don't believe that there's going to be it's going to be something that would pass, but I guess you never know. Kind of like what you said, the unknown is there are a lot of new Republicans that we're going to be working with this new session, and but my feeling is I've got to agree with Representative González that that is not going to pass on the House side. On the Senate side, I do not know. We'll have to let the senator respond to that.
We'll get to the senator in just a second. Representative Ordaz, your feeling on that?
Same. I mean, I've spoken to, whether it's my Democratic colleagues or Republican colleagues, I don't believe that there's support in the House to see this through. And I think Representative González did it right where she's manifesting this into the universe, because I don't really believe that there is support. I know Lieutenant Governor Patrick, I mean, this is one of his priorities is ensuring that vouchers is a top priority for the Senate. So there may be support in the Senate, like Representative Ortega said. I don't know. We'll let him answer that. But from what I understand in the House, I just don't even see that really happening. But again, you never know. Yeah.
Since everybody keeps looking at you, Senator Blanco, we'll kick it your way. I do know one of the things that the lieutenant governor sort of threw out there at one point is maybe we exempt rural areas from vouchers, right? So talk about what you see happening in the Senate and how this may
I
play
think
out.
that's going to be the sticking point, Bob. I represent urban and extremely rural communities. And you can't expect positive results when you defund something, right? How are you going to go and defund our public school system, which educates most kids in the state of Texas, and pull funding from it? These are taxpayer dollars that are being diverted from our public school system to private schools. Okay, so you're taking it away from the future workforce of the state of Texas. In rural communities specifically, a lot of rural communities are going to 4-day school days. But how are you going to attract and retain teachers who are already upset, who are already struggling? I've got a sister who teaches at EPISD. It's a struggle. So how do you take money out of a system that's failing and then blame it for not working? It just doesn't make sense. So I think you're going to see rural Republicans, and Dr. González had mentioned this. I mean, there'll be a battle. There will be a lot of amendments. There's going to be there's this discussion about carving out rural communities. But even if you carve them out and they vote yes, they're voting yes to take money out of their system. And how many private schools are in Fort Stockton? And how many private schools are in Presidio? 0. So I've got to imagine that our state senators that are in those rural communities are in a tough spot. And I think it's going to be a fight. I'm against it, by the way.
Yeah, I thought so. It is. You mentioned the 4-day school week. We're starting to see that in El Paso now too. and it may have spread, and you represent some of those districts, Representative González represents some of those districts too, and we probably ought to talk more about rural education than I had planned tonight, but that's an important issue. These rural school districts are struggling right now with what they have. It's hard to attract teachers, hard to keep them, so anything that compounds that is going to be problematic. Representative Moody, last word on this subject for you.
I'll be very short, Bob. On the House floor, we signaled this for yes and this for no. So this is where I stand on stealing money from our public schools.
So I think we've got some unanimity on that one here. Next, I want to talk about an issue that does not, probably on the surface, appear to be a legislative issue, but I think it may be. And in all honesty, I will say that this question comes from somebody I ran into when walking through my neighborhood the other day, and he mentioned that he had talked to Representative Ortega about this. So I'm going to give you the first chance to talk about this. El Paso's elected district attorney, Yvonne Rosales, recently resigned after 2 very tumultuous years. After her resignation, Sheriff Wiles suggested that maybe the state strengthen the qualifications to be a district attorney in Texas. And this person I ran into in my neighborhood, a retired attorney, and he was kind of wondering the same thing. His expertise is in civil practice, and he said, I have to get board certified to be able to do a lot of the work I do. Shouldn't a DA have to meet some of these similar standards? And right now, you know, especially the attorneys in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, basically you need to be a licensed attorney and you're qualified to be DA, right? So is this something that this delegation should be looking at in sort of a leadership way for the rest of the state? You know, we drew the short straw here. We're kind of dealing with the results of electing somebody who, through all evidence, was not prepared for the job. So should we look at putting more qualifications to be elected district attorney? And since it was one of your constituents who brought this up for me, Representative Ortega, you want to start with the response?
Actually, I did talk to the lawyer. I know him, as you said, he's a civil trial attorney, and so I've known him for many years. And so he wanted to talk to me about it. I'm an attorney, and I have been practicing in the civil field rather than the criminal side. Many moons ago, I was an assistant federal public defender, but that was just for a few years, and then I went into the civil practice. And I was listening to him, and I actually thought about it before. I think he's right. I think that there should be more qualifications for somebody who is going to become the lead prosecutor, especially in an urban community. I know that one of the things that when we've actually looked into it was we were told that in rural communities, going back to rural places, is that they have a difficult time finding somebody who is willing to actually take on that job to become the district attorney for their county. So they actually have to recruit people, and they find it difficult. So when you think about that problem, you think, well, maybe there should be 2 different kinds of standards when it comes to actually qualifying somebody for that position. And I think that in urban, large communities like El Paso, we certainly ought to have somebody who is experienced in the criminal, in handling and trying criminal cases. It's difficult to say lawyer who has been trying criminal cases is also going to be a good administrator, but at least they need to know what they're doing in the courtroom. They need to know where to get a good team, place a good team together to actually go out there and assist them in running a large office like the one we have here in El Paso. So yes, I am looking into it. I am talking to people, and trying to get input from them in terms of what kinds of standards should we have for somebody to actually qualify to run for DA. Right now, the only qualification is you have to be a licensed lawyer and you've got to be in good standing with the state bar. And here, maybe this is one where I can kind of toss it over to someone in our group who has actually practiced criminal law for a while, and that, of course, is Representative Moody, because I know that he took a great interest in terms of what was going on with our former DA. And that's not to talk bad about her, and I know that she probably tried very hard to put together a good team, but somehow it didn't work. And we certainly need somebody who is experienced, knows what they're doing, and it's certainly not good to have something like, have that kind of black eye in our community to where the DA was pretty much forced to resign. So I would appreciate any input, maybe here in the audience, in terms of what they think should be sufficient qualifications to actually run for that position, because there should be some sort of qualification.
So first of all, well played. I will bounce it over to Representative Moody with the obvious disclaimer that you are not a disinterested party in this. You have mentioned that you may be considering running for district attorney yourself. I just wanted to put that out there as we frame this. But from a standpoint of somebody who has practiced criminal law and has worked at the district attorney's office, should we be looking as a state at increasing the standards for hiring somebody? And I should say the last thing I want to add is kind of a caveat to all of this. Voters have a responsibility here too. We elect the district attorney too, so I don't, I don't want to let that go unsaid too. So take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this through the whole process, no matter how critical I was of the former district attorney, elections do matter, and people being involved and engaged, they matter. And one of the biggest, problems that I think she created for our community is that she divested us of the ability to choose our own district attorney for the next 2 years. Took that power away by the way she operated that office. That's a problem. And we have tools, obviously, within the system to remove folks. I think it's going to be very interesting how this plays out in other large municipalities. Much like, and I'll get to the core of your question, but this does concern me. There has been a growing drumbeat to attack local government, right? The city wants to have a wage theft ordinance. The city wants to do this for working families, to give them paid sick leave. The city wants to make sure that they have rest and water breaks or some livable wage. And the state government has come in. They used to be for local government, and it said, no, we're going to usurp all of that power. You're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to make those choices for yourself anymore. Understand that the major municipalities in Texas are now run, save for Fort Worth, Tarrant County, by a Democratic district attorney, right? That's Houston, that's Fort Bend, or Harris County, Fort Bend, Bexar County, Travis County, Dallas County, out here, right? And you've got some other smaller counties on the coast. The tool that was utilized here, I think, was, utilized properly. I think there was a lot of problems in that office.
The removal petition you're talking about.
The removal petition is something I think but just watch how that gets used now. It had been used sparingly in the history of this state and not successfully in the history of the state, but now it has been shown to be a tool to remove a district attorney specifically. I'll be interested to see what that looks like in other jurisdictions for maybe people we don't think are doing a poor job, but maybe they said, it's the policy here in Fort Bend County that we're not going to run low-level drug offenses through our system. We think that is a waste of resources. Well, what about someone saying, well, that's incompetence on their part because they're not following state law? We've already heard that at the legislature. We've already heard Dan Patrick go after the district attorney in Harris County for failing to prosecute certain levels of cases. we should be watching how that plays out, because I think that's going to be important in the next 5 to 10 years. Experience always matters. We do this with district judges. We require them to, we just increased it, I think. That you have to have a certain, was it 10 years now practicing? I don't think anything like that would be problematic, because at the same time as we up that requirement, we stair-stepped both district judges and district attorneys into a pay bump as they serve time, first term, second term, third term, fourth term. So we gave them the same stair-step for salary, yet they don't have the similar experience level required at the entry. I don't think that would be a problem. To create to be certified criminal, to be criminal law, board certified in criminal law, I don't think that's necessary. The job of a district attorney in a county like this is a job of mostly an administrator. They shouldn't be trying an enormous amount of cases. They should be able to understand the office. They should be able to understand the laws and how they interact. They need to be able to work with their law enforcement community, with their local government, here with the county and with the city, the local smaller municipalities. They got to work with Fort Bliss here. It is an intermediary for a lot of different things. So I don't know that specific trial experience. I think it's important if you are defending someone and you're asking for the taxpayers to pay for your legal bill as a court-appointed attorney, I absolutely think you should have some experience doing what you are asking you to do, because that directly implicates the taxpayer dollars that are going to. I think there's plenty of other ways to hold DAs accountable. Years of experience I don't think would be a problem. I think trying to get into the nitty-gritty of what type of experience that is could become problematic. And so I don't think I'd go much further than that, because the job has changed drastically in the last few years. I will say that it was very heartbreaking to have our community go through that. I've taken great pride in working on criminal justice reform issues over the last 14 years in Texas, and have worked with people around the state in this country trying pretty amazing new things to bring different forms of justice depending on what met the needs of those communities. So to have that happen in my backyard was personally very heart-wrenching to watch, and my hope is there's some stability there for the next couple of years.
Representative Ordaz, I want to go to you next with an issue that you raised in your opening remarks too. You talked about women's health, and I would like you to talk a little bit more about the contraceptive bill that you proposed, but I want to frame it this way. Texas now has some of the nation's most restrictive abortion laws, and Republican leaders are seeking to tighten those restrictions even more in the next session. How are you going to approach these issues? And again, talk a little bit more about the contraceptive bill that you're proposing.
Sure. Thank you for that opportunity to talk about this issue. You know, talking to a lot of my Republican colleagues, I mean, these are a lot of private conversations about the bill that was passed last legislative session. Many agree, that it went a little far in relation to, the exception for rape and incest. And I know on the campaign trail, many Republicans were getting a lot of heat for that. It showed up in the polling. It was a scary time. Women in this state were really afraid, me being one, just feeling like women's health is under attack. We knew that last legislative session was one of the most conservative, actually it was the most conservative session in Texas's history. And there was an attack on women's health. And so I do feel there is that support to at least address how we're going to support women in healthcare matters. For example, so we know that Speaker Phelan has already spoken about ensuring that there's going to be support for postpartum care. So we know that is a priority. That has been spoken about publicly.
It's capped at 6 months now, is that right?
Right, and it was originally supposed to be 12, but then it died in the Senate, or it was reduced in the Senate because of again, because of the issue about expansion of Medicaid, right? And so.
And that we should clarify, this is Medicaid funding we're
Yes,
talking about.
yes. And so hopeful that something like that would pass. I'm curious to get the senator's thoughts on that issue coming through the Senate. But in relation to how we're going to protect women and ensure that women's health care is a priority coming into the session, there was a really disturbing study that happened out of Dallas, and it was out of 2 hospitals post this legislation. And it was very, very concerning because now, because of the legislation that was passed, now a civilian can sue a physician if they believe that they're, not abiding by the law. And so in 2 of these hospitals, one hospital devised a team of healthcare experts to determine if this specific case could qualify for an abortion. And I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was really disturbing because what came out of that was the immense amount of time that was spent determining whether or not these women could qualify for an abortion, and their health just severely, decreased. There was hemorrhaging issues, a number of healthcare scares for these women because of this harmful legislation that was passed. And that was just a study out of Dallas, right? So we know that this is a serious issue for many women in this community. We know there's this strange obsession with abortion. You would think that, okay, now that after post-Roe, we're not going to be talking about this anymore. No, there's now talk about from some of my colleagues about criminalizing people who help aid, women who are trying to travel across the state to receive healthcare access. It's unfortunately, it's going to be an issue that is going to continue. But there are some reasonable things that we can do, like access to contraceptives, and ensuring that we can allow patients to access birth control for 12 months. Just making it more accessible, easier to access. So that's something, like I said, I'm going to be working really hard on this session.
Senator Blanco, let's talk about the mood in the Senate dealing with particularly reproductive health issues going forward, probably even more dug in than in the House. So what do you see realistically happening around these reproductive issues, either more stringent prohibitions crossing state lines, or perhaps creating some more exceptions on the other end of the extreme?
I think that you're going to see more of it. Unfortunately, I think you're going to see banning out-of-state travel, which really impacts counties such as El Paso or some of our counties in the eastern part of the state next to Louisiana or up in Oklahoma. It's already happening. Women in El Paso are going to go to Juarez. Women in El Paso are going to go to New Mexico. So definitely, I think that there's going to be legislation coming out of the Senate focusing on banning travel. I think that they're going to go further and looking at impacting insurance companies or small businesses that carry these insurances and penalizing small businesses that cover any kind of travel outside. So look, in the state of Texas, the anti-women's health lobby and political action committee is strong. And this is why elections matter. And unless we get Republicans to move on this issue in their districts, you're going to see more of it. Now, I will say that there have been Republicans that say that it's gone too far. The cases of incest and rape, that goes too far, and in certain cases where the mother is in jeopardy of her life, that may have gone too far as well. So there has been a Republican who has mentioned that.
You mean a Republican in the Senate?
Right, Senator Nichols.
So that's one.
Right. There was somebody else there was somebody else in the House, I think, or Senate, maybe? Somebody else said it. So some folks are out there putting that out there, right? So it's an uphill battle. But the anti-women's health lobby is not going anywhere. The anti-women's health political action committees are not going anywhere. And, it's mostly men making these decisions in the legislature. They're getting in between a woman and her physician to make these healthcare choices. And I think it's sad. But it's politics. People run on this stuff. People get elected on this stuff. There's a lot of money in it. We're going to see these bills coming before us this next session, unfortunately.
Representative Moody, anything you want to add on that?
No, I mean, it's one of those things that it continues to be, every time you start a session, well, we can't possibly do anything more here. We have.
How many sessions have you been through?
Too many. No, but I mean, when you think about where things started, it was dealing with, you go back to Wendy Davis's famous filibuster in the Senate, where we were talking about the specs in an emergency room, right? So that would actually limit physical access for women to certain types of facilities to perform abortions. And so we went from what it was kind of around the edges, but still aimed at curtailing that access to health care, to directly at it, to people advocating the death penalty for a woman who sought and obtained an abortion because that person is pro-life. I've had that debate on the House floor. So that's how far we've gone. That is a real conversation that's happened in committee and on the House floor. In fact, the member that promoted that is running for Speaker of the House. That's where we are in Texas politics when it comes to women's health care. And the senator used the word sad. It's almost like there is no word, because I have seen my colleagues who are the target of this legislation just be hurt over and over and over and not listened to and run over time and again. And it is it's disheartening. And a lot of times you'll hear people talk behind the scenes that, well, we don't really want to do this, but back in people in my district, I got to vote for this. And to me, that's not leadership. And hopefully we can start to turn back the other way, where we're not doing just things that are politically expedient. A mentor of mine who is now leaving the House, Garnet Coleman, said, good policy makes good politics. Lead with policy. The politics will follow. If you get those twisted, you will get it wrong. And I've seen it more often now than I've seen it in the early part of my career. But hopefully if we can focus on that and get back to the core policies that government's supposed to be involved in, that I think we've talked about a lot here tonight, we can have better results. And so it can be disheartening, but for those out there who want to find a message of hope, you cannot stop. You cannot stop that conversation. You have to continue marching forward and making those changes within the corners of the world, no matter the issue, whatever the issue is. Make those changes in the corner of the world that you have influence in. And that does change over time. I just explained to you how large a shift we've taken in 14 years. That can happen for something in a positive way, too. And so that's something we need to remember.
Representative González, I know this is an issue that you've been very passionate about. So how do you plan on addressing women's health issues coming up in this session? Obviously, knowing the math there too, and frankly, you're probably on defense more than offense, right? But how do you address this coming up in this session?
So I want to echo and ditto everything my colleagues said. The other day I was with Senator Zaffarini, and we were at an event, and she was giving a speech. And in her speech, she talked about when a young person came to her and asked her, "What does a senator do?" And she responded by saying, "I choose who lives or dies." And she didn't mean like herself personally, but that the policies that we make have life or death implications. Very similar to the legislation that has been passed regarding women's health, very similar to the anti-LGBT legislation that has caused a rise in negative mental health stigmas for LGBTQ youth. I think, unfortunately, you're right. The numbers aren't on our side when it comes to a lot of social justice policies, whether it's women's health, whether it's LGBTQ issues, whether it's border issues and migration and immigrants. And the only thing I can do in my position is to humanize the issues. We can get into this place of ideology, but the very real reality is these are people's lives. And the very real impact of the policies that we pass during session is that people's lives are negatively and or positively impacted. People ask me, "What'd you do this break?" And I cooked for my family. I slept and played with my dogs and rode horses. But I also watched the West Wing Marathon. And yes, everybody else is clapping. But in the West Wing Marathon, there's this like scene, and they ask her like, "Why do you keep fighting?" And she's like, "Well, what's the alternative?" I get it. Like, the numbers are bad, but what's the alternative? I'll speak for myself, but I also know my colleagues on the stage feel the same way. We cannot let injustice happen just because it's happening. We just have to keep fighting and have to keep humanizing it and have to keep saying that these are people's lives that will be negatively harmed by these policies.
And Representative Ortega, I think we'll wrap up on this issue with you. How do you plan to address these issues in the next session?
Well, I think it's exactly what's already been said, and that is we can't stop fighting. We have to continue to do everything we can to keep bad bills from becoming law. And that's what we do really well. I mean, we as Democrats actually have what we call points of order, where we try to kill bad bills. And the other thing that I try to do is try to pass positive type of legislation. Obviously, we're not going to do much when it comes to abortion rights. We know that that's a lost cause. I know that there's been talk that the governor is saying, okay, we're going to make an exception. We are going to have exception for rape and incest. So that's something that I believe we're going to see. They're going to toe down the horrible bill that passed last session. But we can continue to do positive things, like talked earlier about the fact that with postpartum, I mean, we've had a report that really indicts the state of Texas when it comes to women who could have been helped if they had had health care provided to them after they gave birth to their child. And last session, the House fought really hard to extend Medicaid benefits to postpartum women for 12 months. And kind of like what was said, on the Senate side, they cut it back to 6 months. And so we had no choice but to accept it or have no legislation to help the post-maternal crisis. And so even that, even though it became law, it's never been put into effect, and that's because on the federal side, there was some language on that bill that the feds do not accept. And so now I have filed that bill. Other members in the House have filed that bill to correct the problem with the way it was worded. And we have been told by the Speaker, talking to him recently when he was here in El Paso, that he fully supports it. So it is a bill that is going to get out of the House. Again, something positive to help with regard to health care. And I mean, it's just filing bills that we believe that are not going to be opposed by our Republican colleagues, and trying to make more headways when it comes to providing more health care to people in this community.
We're running out of time, so this will be my last question. and this could be a therapy session. We'll see how it goes. You all have mentioned, I think, at one point or another here, that one of the hallmarks of the El Paso delegation over the last decade or so has been a sense of unity, shared purposes, a lot of cooperation, especially when it comes to issues of importance directly to El Paso. There are those of us of a certain age who remember when that wasn't always the case. But in the 2021 session, I think we need to acknowledge that there were some divisions within the delegation triggered largely by redistricting, both in the session and then in the 2022 primary season that came about after the redistricting was done. There were hard feelings. I think it's fair to say, and I'm talking primarily about the House delegation. So Senator Blanco, if you wish, you can sit this one out. But I may come back to you to sort of to wrap it up. So, you know, I guess it's a two-part question to end with. Do those hard feelings from 2021 linger after the redistricting? Representative Ordaz, two of the people on the stage endorsed your opponent in the primary. You and Representative Ortega took a different approach on coming back after the quorum break than Representative Moody, Representative González, and Representative Fierro at the time. So I'm just, two-part question here. Do the hard feelings linger at all? And then two, how do you all work together in what, as is already very evident from the conversation, promises to be a really challenging legislative session in 2023? And Representative Ordaz, since you were the focal point of a lot of this over the redistricting, I'd like to let you start with the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm happy to take that. I just don't want to say redistricting for like another 10 years, but we are actually going to have to address redistricting. I think that's like the first thing we have to do this coming session, unfortunately, just to kind of solidify. That's another issue. But anywho, no, there's definitely no hurt feelings. I mean, this happens in a redistricting year. Unfortunately, it happened to El Paso, and D-on-D crime is never fun. I had differences of opinion with Representative Fierro on a couple of things. Him and I have spoken about that. But at the end of the day, we know, like we were talking about, the difficulties of ensuring that we're going to have a strong voice in Austin. It's very difficult. We've spoken about just a myriad of issues that we are going to have to deal with this coming session, and we all are taking different battles in a number of issues. And so we do have to come together. All of us say the same thing, that El Paso always comes first. And this really is a great team. It would be such a disservice to this community. It'd be a disservice to each of us. And I know none of us have that energy to expend on each other when we're already fighting that battle in Austin. So ensuring that we are going to put politics behind us. I mean, at the end of the day, it's politics. It shouldn't be personal, and we have to work together. And so I've had a number of conversations with my colleagues on the stage about what we can do to ensure that we're going to move forward. What are those issues that are important to our community? And we put it behind us. And this happens. I mean, this is not unique to El Paso. I mean, this happens in redistricting where incumbents are paired here and there. And unfortunately, it was just El Paso this time. But I know I put it behind me, and I want to move forward. I'm very optimistic about this coming session, and like I said earlier, I'm tremendously honored to be sitting on this stage with this group of legislators that are doing one hell of a job for our community.
Representative Ortega, I want to go to you next. For those who don't remember, it was actually you and Representative Ordaz who wound up getting paired in the redistricting. That didn't happen because Representative Ordaz moved and wound up running against Representative Fierro. but I know from talking with you at the time, you had disagreements about how the redistricting process overall unfolded. You thought that El Paso could have gotten a better deal if you'd taken some different approaches. I'm just curious from your focal point, any lingering effects of that very painful battle in 2021, and how do you work together to make sure that you have a very successful 23 legislative session?
Okay, I have to agree. It was very painful. And I think the most painful thing was actually losing a district in our community. But I have to say that we are small, but we are powerful. And you never know whether that district that was combined with a member from South Texas will change. It could be that we will elect in the future another member from El Paso, and I'm looking forward to having that happen in hopefully sometime soon. But in terms of having any bad feelings, I know that since we are a democratic community, our voice, even we are a powerful delegation, but we don't have the same clout because we are a democratic community. So that's something that we have to accept. And no, there are no hard feelings. I think that we have to even be stronger in terms of being unified because we don't know what to expect during this next session. And I think that when it comes to El Paso issues, I don't think that there's anybody here that I would rather be fighting with on the House floor. I think that everybody is incredibly strong in staying together on things that affect our community. So I'm proud to be serving with everybody here in this delegation. And kind of like what Representative Ordaz Perez said, you've got to move forward. You can't, because otherwise you're not doing justice to your constituents. You've got to be able to work together and put that behind.
Representative González, you noted earlier that there were 3 special sessions, I think, after the 2021 session. You made the decision, along with Representative Moody and Representative Fierro, to be among the first Democrats to come back from the quorum break. You got a lot of criticism from some of your colleagues in the legislature, Democrats around the state. I know it was not an easy decision for you to make then. But you got beat up pretty good. Just curious from your standpoint, do any of those hard feelings linger, and what do you do to make sure that on the issues where you all share the commonality that you continue to work together this coming year?
I love my district. I wake up every morning and I'm just really happy to represent what I think is one of the most beautiful parts of the state, with the most beautiful people. If you've been to San Eli or if you've been to Clint, just the most humble and kind and generous and loving and hardworking people. And for the last decade of my life, literally most of my adult life, they've elected me to go back and fight for them. And that means I have to work with not only, of course, my colleagues here on the stage, but across the aisle and with everybody to make sure we are, again, changing the conditions, life or death, for people in my district who have been underrepresented for a very long time. I represent 260 colonias. Fighting to get them water and wastewater infrastructure is always one of my key priorities, making sure that we're taking care of our most vulnerable people. And so when I think about every decision that I make, whether it was coming back from DC, whether it's the relationships that I build, whether it's the long nights that we have to put in, I feel really, I center my commitment to the people that I serve in everything that I do, in every decision that I make. And so my number one job, and I know this, is that relationships make the building work. And so I will always put whatever feelings anyone may have, the needs of my constituents and my people before anything first. And that's what I've done for the last decade, and that's why I think I get to keep coming back and representing them. There are very hard decisions you have to make every single day, and sometimes you have no idea, is this the right decision? But all you can do is stay authentic and be integral to your values and your character and the people who sent you here. And I feel very strong about that. And I will say, we keep talking about we're small and I don't know what words we keep using, but it's a unique position for the last 2 years. If you think about the most, like the committees that people would consider the most influential or powerful committees, you would say calendars and appropriations. Well, vice chair of calendars, vice chair of appropriations. It's the first time El Paso has had this type of influence to get things done, and we can see that happening and the outcomes of that. And so I hope that, we continue to have those positions to make sure that our community can do the work it needs to do.
And Representative Moody, Representative González just mentioned you were vice chair of calendars. You were also the Speaker Pro Tem in the last session. You lost that position because you made the decision to walk out with your Democratic colleagues. So you angered your Republican colleagues in the House with that move. Then you made the decision to return ahead of other Democrats and end the quorum break. As I just mentioned, you angered a lot of your fellow Democrats at that point. So you kind of caught it coming and going there. And then, obviously in the primary, you supported Representative Fierro. So that, doesn't just go away overnight, obviously. And I'm just curious how have you moved past it, if you have, and what do you do in this coming session to really keep the focus where you think it should be?
Well, and Bob, to be fair, you didn't make this as uncomfortable as you could have, because I not only opposed Representative Ordaz once, I opposed her twice.
Yep.
And she won twice. So I'm here to say I give up. She's really good at winning. And apparently that's what she likes to do. And I say that, these are difficult things that I get into. My friend Mary here is someone that when she wanted to run for office, she's had opposition. I don't know how many, have you had opponents every single time? I've stepped in and helped her in her races. When César was running, when he ran for the House, did the same, and was running against an incumbent representative and a former incumbent representative. And we went out and helped build that team. The same for Representative Ortega when she ran. So yes, I didn't make that decision in those races. And Claudia and I sat down at the only place in El Paso that you can fix these problems. It's called the tap. And we had a conversation that I remember most of, and I think it was good. These are difficult things, and I've never faced this type of dynamic in our delegation. We intentionally moved away from that over time. When I got to the House in 2008, that was the number one thing people told me about El Paso. Gary Shar was one of the first ones to pull me aside on the floor. He goes, "This is never going to change for El Paso until that one's gone and this one's gone, and I'll leave their names out of it." And so I took that to heart. Now, I didn't know that I'd be gone in 2010. I lost my election, so I didn't go through redistricting before. I was on the receiving end of litigation. My district was litigated all the way to the United States Supreme Court because it was gerrymandered so badly. And done so under the watchful eye of El Paso colleagues. But at any rate, those are the types of things that we intentionally tried to move away from. And maybe it's something that we need to sit down and talk through to make sure that we don't fall back into that again. And I will own every bit of that I have to own, because I take my senior member, now that I'm senior member, which is bizarre. I started this when I was 27. I've been doing this I didn't have 3 kids. They were running around here earlier. I didn't have a wife and 3 kids when I first started this, but I've learned a lot in my time, but also have to continue learning and evolving and understanding that. This was probably one of the most difficult sessions and special sessions that I've ever been through personally, professionally, up and down, politically. I harbor no ill will to anybody on this stage, and won't, because that's not productive for our community. Are there others that I'm about to go back and see in a week that I might have ill will towards? Possibly, but my therapist and I are talking about that, because I have made a commitment to not lead through anger, but to try and lead with love, because that is very important. I made a very conscious decision to do that after the August 3rd shooting. I feel there's too much negativity, there's too much hostility, there's too much anger in politics. And we're not going to change that individually, but we can own what we do in our own space. And so I want to be a part of solving that, not a part of degrading it further.
And Senator Blanco, I'd like to give you the final word tonight. And I just want to reframe the question a little bit for you. You're a Democrat in a Senate that is overwhelmingly controlled by Republicans. Your 4 House colleagues here are all Democrats in a body that is overwhelmingly Republican. In the last session of the legislature, El Paso had 5 members of the House of Representatives. Now, after the redistricting process, we have 4 point something or other. I'm a journalist, so I'm not really good at math, but that math doesn't add up really well to me in terms of influence, right? So you really have to work hard to make El Paso's voice heard. So given those political realities, what do you and your colleagues need to do as we approach the 88th legislative session to make sure that El Paso's voice is heard and that our community's needs are accounted for in the session?
That's a great question. It's a great segue to the difficult questions you asked right now. I think I do want to make a point. You name one couple that doesn't fight. Name one family that at some point doesn't get along. It's the stress of the relationship that can either break the relationship or make the relationship stronger. And I think in this case, because everyone on this stage, their heart is in this community, is that you're going to see a very strong relationship. And that relationship translates into fighting for El Paso's fair share, because everyone on this stage is passionate about bringing results to our community. The second part of the question, I think everyone here is very talented, and everyone here has their own relationships with those that are in charge, with Republicans. That's not to say that we will ever compromise our values, because we fight hard for our values in the Senate and in the House. But we're also people, we're also human beings, we're also friends with individuals. Joe probably doesn't talk often about his relationship with Dustin Burrows, who is a very key person, or Gary Van Dever. And you can, that Mary has a relationship. We all have very close, important relationships with key decision makers on the other side of the aisle. It's about building trust, and it's about understanding their districts, understanding our districts, which is why we bring Republicans. We're Democrats that bring Republicans into our community, because these are decision makers. Because we're going to set up, all the partisan stuff aside to deliver for our communities. And that's how we deliver, because it's those relationships, it's because of that trust, because of an understanding that we're here to take care of business for our community. We're not here to put politics in front of progress. And I think that's what's going to that's the formula. I think that's the strength of this family. I think that's what's going to make us successful in this next legislative session.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Please give a loud round of applause to our delegation for taking the time to talk with us. And thank you very much to Dr. Serrata, Dr. Moe, and the team here at El Paso Community College for hosting us tonight. Hopefully we can come back after the 15th or 16th special session wraps up and kind of do a post-mortem discussion maybe in November or something like that. We'll see how that goes. All right, thank you all very much and have a good night.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Oh, that was
it's great.